Since I still appreciate you, let's find love while we may. Because I know I'll hate you when you are old and gray. So say you love me here and now, I'll make the most of that. Say you love and trust me, for I know you'll disgust me when you're old and getting fat.
And on that note, I'm your host, Marc Gertz, and welcome to Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm sure many of you are in the car on your way home for the weekend. Sit back, relax, and let us take you through a journey of love, marriage, money, and divorce. I came across an article today by Sharon Brandwein. She's a licensed master social worker, titled Signs and Causes of Emotional Neglect in a Marriage and How to Cope. And after reading this article, it really struck me that this is an area that many couples on the verge of divorce don't really spend a great deal of time to address. And I want to take a few moments in our show today, and I want to go over this article with you and share the insights from it, because I think they're very insightful. All right. So sit back, relax, and keep your eye on the road. And here we go. We're all familiar with the idea of happily ever after, but the truth is that happily ever after rarely comes without a few bumps in the road. Life is filled with plenty of ups and downs, and there are days when everyone wants to tune out and wait for the storm to pass. This is normal. However, when that type of coping mechanism turns into weeks and months, this could be a signal that something much bigger is going on, like emotional neglect in a marriage. Emotional neglect occurs when a spouse fails on a regular basis to attend to or respond to their partner's emotional needs. This is marked by a distinct lack of action by one person toward the feelings of the other, including an absence of awareness, consideration, or response to a spouse's emotions. This leaves the spouse feeling useless and unwanted by their partner. Hallmarks of emotional neglect in marriage include a lack of emotional support and failure to meet a partner's needs. According to associate marriage and family therapist Sarah O'Leary, emotional neglect is when someone's attachment and/or emotional needs are disregarded. She adds, emotional neglect, unsurprisingly, pushes couples apart. You can't feel emotionally safe or secure in a relationship with emotional neglect. It can also really negatively affect your own personal well-being, both mentally and physically. The interesting aspect of emotional neglect is that the victim may only have a vague sense that something is amiss. Without tangible evidence or written proof, they likely find it hard to quantify or express what the issue is. In the end, many people tend to stay in relationships that aren't working because there are no smoking guns, even as the relationship is crumbling around them. What are some of the signs of emotional neglect? Well, let's take a minute and cover that as well. Let's even use them to define what emotional neglect looks like and feels like on a practical level. While it may be difficult to identify it, there are some telltale signs that could help you recognize it in your marriage. There are many ways this behavior can play out in a marriage, including invalidating your partner, ignoring your partner or their bids for connection, or disregarding the vulnerabilities they share or boundaries they assert. Here are some common signs of emotional neglect. You feel like you're alone in your relationship. You prefer to spend time alone versus time with your partner. Your partner shuts down when you want to talk. You're not sure what your partner wants from you. You don't engage in social activities as a couple. Your go-to person is a friend, not your partner. You consistently ignore or suppress your feelings. You don't feel comfortable around your family and friends. You procrastinate on long-term decisions and are hesitant to move forward with things like having kids or buying a home. There's a lack of physical intimacy. You don't feel like you can be yourself with your partner. You don't trust your partner. Some of the causes of emotional neglect can vary from one relationship to the next, but the overarching theme is a shift or transfer in the support of one partner gives to the other. This could look like one partner throwing themselves into a new job or a new mom shifting her focus to her baby. Of course, in some cases, emotional neglect in a marriage might be a result of an extramarital affair. We're going to talk about that more when we come back after this. And we're back on Divorcing Your Mortgage, and I'm your mortgage broker, Marc Gertz, and we're talking about anything having to do with divorce in America. Before the break, we were talking about emotional neglect in relationships. And when it comes to that, it's important to cope with those things, whether or not you're going to stay in the marriage or you're going to get divorced. So how do you do that? Well, the number one thing is don't be a victim. While your partner's behavior may be hurtful, it's important that you don't play the victim card. Doing so can be counterproductive. You'll likely be more accusatory and fall back on the blame game. The fact is, if you spend most of your time and energy telling your partner what they did wrong or how they hurt you, that could put them on the defensive and cause them to distance themselves further and bring you closer to a divorce. While it's important to talk to your partner and let them know how you feel, it's equally important that you don't rehash the same things over and over again. Perhaps the initial conversation should focus on your hurt feelings, but once you get it out, subsequent discussions should be focused on how to fix the problem and move on to a healthier dynamic in your relationship. In other words, focus on solutions. Examine underlying causes for the behavior, for feeling neglected. Just like any problem you tackle in life, it's important to spend some time thinking about what sparked the issue, or in this case, the behavior in the first place. Ask yourself the following questions. Was your relationship always like this, or did it deteriorate over time? Does it feel like your partner's attitude changed from one day to the next? Is there a situation or event that precipitated their change in behavior? If your partner's emotionally neglectful behavior has always been part of your relationship, this may be a much bigger issue than you realize. However, if you can trace this change to a behavior back to a specific event, or you can say with some certainty that your partner is just going through a rough patch, that can make all the difference in how this all plays out. If being emotionally unavailable is just how they operate, changing their behavior will be substantially more difficult, if it's possible at all. However, if this behavior is situational, if it's because something happened, your chance of mending the relationship are likely far greater. How to cope with being in this situation? Be proactive. With any relationship, it takes two to tango. And while the source of neglect might be coming from your partner, it's probably not a good idea to just sit back and wait it out. Remember that sometimes people don't recognize their own behavior. So if your partner doesn't realize that they are being neglectful or hurting, you'll likely never see a change because they don't even know that it's something that's wrong. Talk about it constructively. As difficult as it might be, it's important that you and your partner invest the time to sit down and talk about your relationship. Be sure to pick a time where upcoming commitments don't put your eyes on the clock. And perhaps more importantly, try to do it when you have the bandwidth to deal with it. Trying to have a productive conversation when you're tired, hungry, or stressed will never be fruitful. If you're the spouse that stays home, take these words to heart, because when he or she first walks in the door, that's not the moment to start this conversation. Make arrangements to spend quality time together. While spending more time with an emotionally neglectful partner may seem counterintuitive, sometimes that could be precisely what the relationship needs. Getting some distance from the stress of everyday life, work, and other demands can give everyone a little more breathing room. In the absence of the noise, you can spend much needed time focusing on each other. Who knows? It might just be the thing that rekindles your spark. Through all of this, you have to be patient. Remember that issues take months or years to play out. You can't resolve them overnight. Correcting a pattern of emotional neglect is most certainly a labor of love, if there ever was one. Getting a relationship back on track takes hard work. It takes patience. It takes time. If you seek professional help, remember to put your best foot forward and trust in the process. Don't give up when you hit a plateau. Don't give up when the going gets rough. That's the time you need to dig in and deal with it. And many times, therapy can help handle emotional neglect. In a marriage, it's an issue that can be incredibly difficult to fix on your own, but a good therapist can be infinitely helpful. A trained professional can facilitate constructive conversations, help you get some perspective, and give you both the space to express your feelings. In addition to that, a good therapist is an unbiased third party who can identify emotional neglect. Coming from a neutral entity, your partner might be more likely to hear it and make amends. Another big advantage of a therapist is that they remember what you said, so you can't change it in midstream. But eventually, it might come down to the fact that the relationship can't be saved. And if you've gone through therapy together and talked through all the underlying issues and you're still feeling neglected, you may be at a point where the relationship has to go to divorce. And while no one envisions their lifelong relationship ending, if you and your spouse are unhappy and unfulfilled together, you may both be better off separating. In that case, you're going to probably want to talk to our guest after the break, Ty Supancic, who is a family and marriage attorney. Sorry, Ty, I was giving you more credit for being a therapist, but I've heard that about you. I've heard that you're a good therapist. We'll be back after this, folks. And welcome back to Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm your host, Marc Gertz, and we are covering life, love, money, and divorce. I'm very, very pleased to introduce our guest today, who's also a friend. His name is Ty Supancic, and Ty is a family law attorney. He brings a unique perspective to reorganizing families with his focus on interests and aspirations rather than opposing positions and old-fashioned adversarial win-lose approaches. Ty is all about win-win. This aids in the loving reorganization of families, which is better for children and grandchildren. As a collaborative attorney and highly trained mediator, Ty is passionate about helping his clients accomplish their goals while maintaining their privacy and independence from a broken and overburdened court system. Welcome, Ty Supancic.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
I'm so pleased to have you. I can't begin to tell you. I wanted to start today by defining marriage. And you know as well as I do that in the United States, the definition of marriage, actually more now than ever, is defined by the states themselves as opposed by the national government. So could you just take a second and explain to us what that definition would be in the state of California?
Yeah, the state of California requires a marriage license. Living together, like in other states, you can establish a common law marriage. Not in California. In California, you have to have a marriage. You have to have an officiated ceremony. Someone has to sign off on the marriage license, and it has to get filed with the county recorder's office.
Okay, so in other words, if two people are living together for say 5 years, in the eyes of the state of California, they're not married.
No, and they have none of those marital rights to spousal support or community property.
Okay, if they're married 20 years, are they considered married?
You mean living together 20 years? No.
Living together?
No.
No. Okay. So listen up, folks. You sitting in your cars, all your friends that have been living together, they're not married. Okay, you better let them know that. Okay, because if one of them passes away, guess what? Everything goes to their kids. Am I right, Ty?
That's right, or whoever else they identify in their estate plan.
There you go. There you go. So it's time to head down to City Hall. Now, along similar lines, I mean, most of our listeners are in California through KMET on 1490 AM or 98.1 FM. But some of our listeners are seeing us online, and that could be anywhere in the country and beyond. But let's stay with California. Okay, let's do that. If someone's living separately, is that the same as a legal separation?
No, there's a lot of confusion around that. I talk to people all the time, and they say, well, I'm legally separated. I'm legally separated. And I say, hold on. Did a judge sign a judgment for legal separation? No, I moved out. That's not legally separated. A legal separation requires a court procedure and a filing of a petition for legal separation. It's a huge process, just like a divorce.
Well, why would somebody go through that huge process and then go through a divorce?
It doesn't make a lot of sense nowadays. So for some people, they have a religious prohibition against divorce. They get legally separated. At the end of the process, they get spousal support. They're paying child support. They get child custody orders. All the property's divided, but they're still married. And they can say to their priest, I'm still married. Sometimes someone has a pre-existing condition and their spouse has amazing health insurance. You can't keep your ex on your health insurance. So sometimes people get legally separated, agree to that so they can maintain the health insurance. A lot of the health insurance carriers have gotten wise to that, and many of them won't any longer insure someone who's legally separated. So you need to check and make sure that that's a valid reason.
Okay, so explain this to me. I always thought that getting a legal separation was a precursor to then getting legally divorced. You mean people can get legally separated and stay that way for years?
Yeah, and some of them do. Here's the problem. At some point, invariably, one of them wants to get remarried. And they can't because they haven't been divorced. And then they have to go through the whole process again, which makes them really angry with the lawyer who let them do a legal separation in the first place. So colleagues who won't do legal separations, knowing that at some point their client's going to come back to them angry that they're paying a second time to get divorced.
Okay, well, let me riddle me this. Answer me this. If someone does not plan on getting divorced, let's say they're Catholic and they don't believe in getting divorced, what would be the advantage to getting a legal separation instead of just living apart?
Exactly, the fact that you get a judgment for legal separation that gets you support orders if they're indicated, it gets you custody orders if they're indicated, and it divides property. And most importantly, it makes the liabilities of your ex your problem. If you just separate, you just live apart, and you date someone else and they're dating someone, and then God forbid they're involved in an accident that kills or cripples someone, the creditors are going to come after you because you're still.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. That makes sense. But it sounds to me like what you're saying is that there might actually be some advantages to being legally separated instead of legally divorced, aside from the fact that if you want to marry somebody else later on. But but in a legal separation, you're separating the assets on the one hand, but you can still keep your spouse on your health insurance because technically you're still married. Or am I getting this wrong?
If the health insurance allows for that, many carriers no longer allow for that.
Oh, okay.
So,
All
we're
right.
doing a lot fewer legal separations nowadays, especially in California because it covered California. Now, pre-existing condition big an issue. Affordable healthcare is much more readily available. But in the entertainment industry, you know, many of the guilds have amazing health insurance, and so sometimes we'll get clients that have, you know, the SAG health insurance, and they agree, we'll just do a legal separation. That way, my spouse can stay on. They got a pre-existing condition. They're never going to be able to get coverage as well. But both parties have to agree to that. A judge can't order someone legally separated to maintain.
Oh, okay. This has to be something that they
agree to that.
Okay.
Yes.
So would that be something that would be discussed in mediation?
In mediation or
potentially?
Yeah.
Okay, I got you. All right. Well, it sounds like there's pros and cons, like everything in life and marriage. Now, I understand that in California, you can get divorced without ever having to go to court. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Filing now, no one even ever has to leave their home. I have many of my clients, we do Zoom meetings, we exchange emails, they sign things electronically, I file them electronically. They never have to leave their house or see a judge. We do the entire thing online nowadays. But it requires that they both cooperate and want to stay out of court.
Okay, so but this isn't a case where they agree on everything.
Yes. If you don't agree, you're going to end up in court.
Gotcha. Is this because of COVID, or was this available prior to the ability not to have to go to court?
The clients don't have to because they agree to settle things outside of court. Now, because of e-filing, I don't have to go to court either. It used to be that someone had to go to the courthouse to deliver the paperwork. Nowadays, that's not necessary at all. Yeah, in an old-fashioned divorce, the parties would go to court. They'd go with lawyers or they'd go without lawyers. They'd argue their case to a judge, and the judge would render some decision imposing the law on the couple. And they would often both be happy. Judges like to quip. I know I've done a good job when everybody leaves the courthouse miserable.
That's a post-COVID change. So you had mentioned to me that spouses have the power to choose the outcome of their divorce. Can you explain to us what you mean by that?
In mediation law, the couple can design an outcome. They can horse trade, they can bargain, they can go back and forth. They can come up with much more creative solutions than a judge is ever empowered to order. There's a concept called nesting, where the kids stay in the house and the mom and dad or the parents cycle in and out of the house and the kids never have to leave. A judge could never order. A judge could never order that the parties retain the house until the market recovers. Judge doesn't know the market's going to recover. Judge has to sell the house and divide the proceeds of the debt. The parties can agree, hold on to the house for a little bit. Or let's trade the house for some other asset that's not the same, that a judge couldn't do because you can't trade apples for oranges.
Okay. Is it common in divorces for the family home to be sold?
It is very common, but it's also very common for the parties to want to keep it, especially now that they've got 2.75, mortgage and they don't want to sell it. They don't think they'd be able to ever get in it again. And so they argue to keep the home, but they can't keep the home if they go to court and they don't agree on it. Only the parties agree to keep a house.
I see. I got you. With us a little bit about your background. Where do you come into this? Because if I remember correctly, you did a stint in the entertainment business. Am I correct?
I did.
So
growing up in LA, like everyone else.
Right. Of course. So how did you get attracted to the law, and what was your route to getting into family law?
My father was a a groundbreaking, they call him the godfather of collaborative law. He practiced for 52 years. He was a very well-known family law attorney. When collaborative law came along in 1996, he started championing it. It really changed the landscape in family law. He thought that by the time he died, the whole world would only be doing collaborative law, but he was an optimist. That ability for parties to shape their outcome, for the people to take control and be empowered. Courts aren't designed for family disputes. The courts we inherited were designed by the English to resolve disputes between landowners with no relationship. You're fighting a castle, you're fighting over a pasture. The fight's over, you tear each other apart, and you never see each other again.
Right.
That doesn't work for families. It's a horrible system. And with collaborative law and mediation, it attracted me to a way that I could really, truly help people, not just make more money because I got them an acting gig, or a record deal, but really change their lives and the lives of their kids.
So you were attracted to it naturally because it was in your family.
Yeah.
I got you.
My sister is my law
Your
partner
sister,
now, so
it's totally in the family.
with my father, and now I practice with my sister.
Right.
Yeah,
But when you first got into law, you were doing litigation, weren't you?
I was, because that's what everybody does, and it is still the most common thing because our television and film promote that. All the movies are about, the War of the Roses. They're all about ugly divorces, and that's what you see on reality TV shows, are ugly divorces. Calm, cool, kumbaya mediation isn't entertaining.
There's no drama.
No. And so a lot of people don't know about it. And I meet with people all the time and they say, oh, well, a judge has to make the custody orders. We can't. I'm like, yeah, you can. You know your kid better than the judge. If you can agree on what custody should be and visitation should be, you should do that. Why would you a stranger, sometimes with family law experience? Many of our family law lawyers were public defenders or district attorneys. They have no family law background. They're not qualified to decide where a kid should live.
Interesting. But if somebody does want an attorney and they do want to litigate, can they still use your firm?
Sure.
Okay, but you don't do that yourself
No,
anymore.
they'll be working with my very, very capable sister.
Oh, well, there you go. Still in the family. That works. Perfect. Okay. All right. So talking about collaborative law, talking about what your father championed, how exactly does that work? And is there a difference between collaborative law and mediation?
Yeah, there's a big difference. In mediation, the parties, even though I'm an attorney mediating for them, they don't have to use an attorney mediator. They could use anyone to mediate, but they don't have an attorney in the process. Even though I'm an attorney, I'm serving as a neutral. I can't advocate or give advice. I just help them reach an agreement, and then I document it at the end, and I file it with the court. In the collaborative law model, both parties have lawyers. Both those lawyers have a sworn duty to zealously advocate for their client. But the parties and the lawyers sign a court order that says, in effect, if the lawyers aren't skillful enough negotiators to settle the case without court, and the parties have to go to court, the lawyers are fired, and all of their work comes off the table. That saves the parties a fortune. Even if a client says, I want to settle, I don't want to go to court. If you don't have that court order that says the lawyer can't go to court, the lawyer has a legal obligation to prepare for court. So you're going through a divorce, you go on vacation, you come back to a $10,000 legal bill because your lawyer was getting ready for court behind the scenes. Even though you say, wait, I don't want to go to court. The lawyer has to get ready for court, but not in collaborative. The parties save a fortune.
I read once that divorces can run the gamut anywhere from, I think the average I heard was about 15,000 up to like hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. On a percentage basis, what would you ballpark the savings on a collaborative divorce might be?
On a collaborative divorce, always less than a quarter, sometimes 10%.
Wow. I want to talk more about that when we come back from our break. You're listening to Divorcing Your Mortgage. Welcome back to Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm your host, Marc Gertz. You're listening to KMET. For those in our audience that are sitting in traffic, as long as you're sitting in traffic, not moving in traffic, if you'd like to call in and talk to our guest, attorney Ty Supancic, you can call us at 951-922-3532. That's 951-922-3532. Before the break, we were talking about the economics of divorce, and Ty was sharing with us that collaborative divorce can save a couple tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that right, Ty?
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay. And I think you said that based upon your experience, on average, a collaborative divorce is 75% less expensive than a litigated one?
If not more. Yes.
If not more. Okay. Would you say that investigating or trying a collaborative divorce before litigating might be a step that people should take? Instead, let me rephrase that. We were talking earlier about legal separation, all right? And I told you that I thought you did one and then you did the other, and you were saying, no, it's not really necessary, all right? Do you feel the exact opposite in relation to trying collaborative divorce?
Yeah.
And
if a case is suited to the collaborative process, they should absolutely explore the collaborative process. They should also explore mediation. I think you need to know what your options are. After deciding we're going to get divorced, the second most important decision is what process you're going to use, because that's going to determine how long it takes, how much it costs, and what the impact is on your kids and grandkids. People should always explore mediation if it's a possibility. They should explore collaboration if it's a possibility. If those aren't a possibility, then they're going to have to hire lawyers and go to court. And that's unfortunate, but sometimes that's the tool that you have to use.
Gotcha. The biggest thing that I've heard as a block to couples using collaborative divorce is the fact that they emotionally feel like they hate each other at that particular moment. They're not communicating. Communication is broken down. All right. But I've also heard about collaborative divorce situations where that communication's been able to be repaired.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us some insight into how that happens?
Yeah. One of the tools of the collaborative law process is that in addition to the lawyers, you bring in other professionals to attend to the other issues. Every divorce has three components: a legal component, a financial component, and an emotional component. So in the collaborative law model, we bring in trained mental health professionals. They're usually therapists or licensed clinical social workers that have collaborative training, and they serve as divorce coaches for the parties. They're not doing therapy. They're just helping the parties communicate effectively, not push buttons, not fly off the handle. Sometimes in some meetings, they'll do all the talking on behalf of their clients if the clients are that wound up. And the process work much more smoothly. You mentioned at the beginning that I do a lot of therapy. It's because there's no therapist in the room when I'm mediating, and it kind of falls to me, even though that's not my training. But in the collaborative law model, we have that handled. Just like in surgery, you could go to a simple country doctor who puts the mask on you and cuts you open. Or you could have modern surgery where you have an anesthesiologist and you've got all the specialists doing their jobs in concert, more efficiently, more effectively, much better outcome for the parties.
I see. So if we were to use an analogy, you would say that collaborative divorce is more like using a surgeon to fix something in you than using a general practitioner, which would be be more like what litigation
The GP, he's going to do it all himself. collaborative law
Right.
model, you got a mental health professional handling the mental health issues, you got a lawyer handling the issues. You bring a joint, neutral financial person who has a fiduciary duty to both parties, and they handle all the financial issues. Instead of having dueling CPAs, you have one person
Mhm.
who owes both parties a fiduciary duty. They take all the financial information, they come back with a report.
Well, it sounds to me almost like collaborative divorce. It is sort of a no-brainer, and yet lots of people don't use it. Um, if you could boil it down to one or two reasons why people don't use collaborative divorce, could you share that with us? Any insight on that?
The main reason is people don't know about it, Mark. I talked to colleagues, family law
Really?
lawyers, who still don't understand that you have to have that court order to relieve the lawyers of the obligation to prepare for trial. I speak with lawyers and they say, let's do a collaborative case. I say, great, we'll sign that court order. And they go, oh, I don't want to sign that. Like, well, then you're bringing a gun to a knife fight. It's a fight if you got a gun in your waistband. If you can go to court, I got to prepare for court too. And now the parties are spending all that money that they don't want to spend preparing for court. The second reason,
It sounds to me like there's almost a rift in the family law section.
Mark, there's a lot of lawyers whose business model, whose overhead, whose rent, who depends on them going to court 3 or 4 days a week, some 5 days a week, so they can pay their bills.
That's pretty harsh, Ty.
It's their
Obviously,
business
you
model.
feel strongly about it. It's business model. I got you. Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. There's something called the tender years doctrine, correct? All right. Can you explain to us what that is, and what the court's position on that is?
Sure. It used to be in California that during a child's tender years, they needed a more maternal influence. And so judges would very often order more time with mom than with dad when kids were young. California got rid of that. We do not recognize that anymore. The default position of the courts now is that children should spend equivalent time with both parents, or all three parents if there's more than two. And so that joint custody or shared custody is much more common now.
Okay. Is any of that an outcome of same-sex marriage?
It predates that.
It predates that. Okay, so it's been a long time.
California's rejection of the tender years doctrine predates that. Yes, I mean.
Well, that's interesting, because I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone that didn't say, if we were talking about divorce or talking about raising children, that didn't automatically say that that the mother was going to get custody, or that the children were going to live with the mother. I think there's even a Sting song that talks about that.
That hasn't been the case in California for many, many years.
Wow, that's remarkable. That's remarkable. Well, we're coming to the end of our time together. I am so glad that you came on. I can't tell you how many fictions you've addressed today. Can you give our listeners an idea of how they can get in touch with you?
Sure, they can.
And you're
sure, they can visit my website, thelawcollaborative.com. They can our number and contact information are there. That's probably the best way to get a hold of us.
Okay, let me say that, lawcollaborative.com. That's the best way to reach you.
The Law Collaborative. We wanted it long and complicated.
thelawcollaborative.com. Kai Supancic, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for helping us separate fact from fiction, and we'll have you back on the show another time. Thanks very much, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Divorcing Your Mortgage on KMAT. Welcome back. I'm your host, Marc Gertz. I'm a mortgage broker in California, and other states as well. We're discussing life, love, money, and divorce. Anything having to do with divorce, this show can handle. If you know of anybody that you think would be a great guest for this show, please don't hesitate to call in and share their information with us. We would love to meet them and help them to share information with you. On the last segment of our show today, I want to share a story with you by the great late Maya Angelou, titled New Directions. Because, one of the things about divorce is that it's traumatic. It's one of the most traumatic things that people go through in life, in addition to moving and changing jobs and a few other things. And many times when marriages are falling apart and people are at loggerheads with each other, even in a collaborative divorce situation, like with our guest, Ty Supancic, they feel that there's no hope. They feel that there's no tomorrow. And I want to leave you on an up note this weekend by sharing this little story by Maya Angelou with you. In 1903, the late Mrs. Annie Johnson of Arkansas found herself with two toddling sons, very little money, a slight ability to read and add simple numbers. To this picture, add a disastrous marriage and the burdensome fact that Mrs. Johnson was a Negro. When she told her husband, Mr. William Johnson, of her dissatisfaction with their marriage, he conceded that he too found it to be less than he expected and had been secretly hoping to leave and study religion. He added that he thought God was calling him not only to preach, but to do so in Enid, Oklahoma. He did not tell her that he knew a minister in Enid with whom he could study and who had a friendly unmarried daughter. They parted amicably, Annie keeping the one-room house and William taking most of the cash to carry himself to Oklahoma. Annie, over 6 foot tall, big bone, decided that she would not go to work as a domestic and leave her precious babes to anyone else's care. There was no possibility of being hired at the town's cotton gin or lumber mill, but maybe there was a way to make the two factories work for her. In her words, I looked up the road I was going and back the way I came. And since I wasn't satisfied, I decided to step off the road and cut me a new path. She told herself that she wasn't a fancy cook, but that she could mix groceries well enough to scare hungry away and from starving a man. She made her plans meticulously and in secret. One early evening, to see if she was ready, she placed stones in two 5-gallon pails and carried them 3 miles to the cotton gin. She rested a little and then discarded some rocks. She walked in the darkness to the sawmill 5 miles further along the dirt road. On her way back to her little house and her babies, she dumped the remaining rocks along the path. The same night, she worked into the early hours boiling chicken and frying ham. She made dough and filled the rolled out pastry with meat. At last, she went to sleep. The next morning, she left her house carrying the meat pies, lard in an iron brazier, and coals for a fire. Just before lunch, she appeared in an empty lot behind the cotton gin. As the dinner noon bell rang, she dropped the savers into boiling fat, and the aroma rose and floated over to the workers, who spilled out of the gin, covered with white lint, looking like specters. Most workers had brought their lunches of pinto beans and biscuits, or crackers, onions, and cans of sardines, but they were tempted by the hot meat pies, which Annie ladled out of the fat. She wrapped them in newspapers, which soaked up the grease, and offered them for sale at a nickel each. Although business was slow those first days, she was determined. She balanced her appearances between the 2 hours of activity. So on Monday, if she offered hot, fresh pies at the cotton gin, she sold the remaining cooled down pies at the lumber mill for 3 cents. Then on Tuesday, she reversed it. For the next few years, on balmy spring days, blistering summer noons, and cold, wet, and wintry middays, Annie never disappointed her customers, who would count on seeing the tall, brown-skinned woman bent over her brazier, carefully turning the meat pies. When she felt certain that the workers had become dependent on her, she built a stall between the two hives of industry and let the men run to her for their lunchtime provisions. She had indeed stepped from the road which seemed to have been chosen for her and cut herself a brand new path. In years, that stall became a store where customers could buy cheese, meals, syrup, cookies, candy, writing tablets, and leather soles for worn-out shoes. You know, each of us has the right and the responsibility to assess the roads which lie ahead and those over which we've traveled. And if the future road looks ominous or unpromising and the roads back uninviting, then we need to gather our resolve and, carrying only the necessary baggage, step off that road into a new direction. If the new choice is also unpalatable without embarrassment, we must be ready to change that as well. I hope that gives you some hope and some comfort this weekend, especially if you're going through a divorce. Thanks for listening. My name is Marc Gertz. I'm a mortgage broker in California and a certified divorce lending professional. Please call me if I can be of help to you in a divorce that you're going through. And certainly, I hope your divorce is more collaborative than confrontative. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week at KMET. This is Divorcing Your Mortgage.
So please remember, when I leave in December, I told you so in May.